Hi, my name is Dr. Alan Barnard. I'm a decision scientist, and one of the interesting parts of being a decision scientist is that when people face very difficult decisions, they often reach out to me for to ask for advice. And this has been the case recently with the coronavirus. Friends and colleagues and customers are reaching out and saying, Alan, what should we do? Should we stay at home? Should we take our kids out of the school? It can all be quite overwhelming, especially if you don't understand what's going to happen, how this might impact you, and what's the best way of dealing with it. A little bit of background is, as a decision scientist, I've always been really curious and passionate about why good people make and often repeat bad decisions. And as a general rule, our insights have been in my research labs that people make bad decisions for very good reasons. So what are these good reasons? Well, we tend to procrastinate in making good changes or choices because of some exaggerated fear of losing the positives that we think is unique to the status quo, to our current situation, or some exaggerated fear of the effort or the risk it might take to make the good change. At the same time, we can also overreact and make really bad changes or choices when we have some exaggerated frustration with the status quo or some exaggerated expectation of a future change. So that's the general rule. But there are exceptions, and these exceptions, I think, apply specifically to cases like what to do in a case like the coronavirus. Well, there's two conditions that tells you when it's a good idea to procrastinate. So I'm going to take myself as an example. I procrastinate all the time, and I was curious, why do I do it? Why do I do it? What's the benefit that I get? Well, it turns out that there is a real benefit, is that when I procrastinate, I get to a point where the mind goes, dude, unless you start right now, you're going to be late, or you're going to do a terrible job at preparing for that presentation. And when you get into that state, the mind goes into the state of flow, right? When it panics so much that it will block out all the distractions, and you're giving this task that you're busy with your full attention. And whenever we get anything or anyone our full attention, really good things happen, right? We can get an enormous amount of breakthroughs. We can get a lot done in a very short period of time. So that's one of the conditions where procrastination is good, is if it can get you into that mental state of flow. But there's another condition, which is if somehow you realize that by waiting a little bit longer, you can get some additional information to help you make a better decision. Of course, it's very easy to fool yourself and to procrastinate too long, and then you run out of time. And that's kind of what my warning is on this media post, is what should be the advice when it comes to overreacting or panicking. Well, there's, generally speaking, bad idea to overreact, right? Bad idea to panic. Unless, what's the unless conditions? Well, there's two conditions that I look for. The first one is anything that involves exponential growth. You really don't want to take chances. You want to act as soon as you can. And secondly, that's true especially if there's finite resources involved. So let me give an example, using the coronavirus as an example. As soon as I heard about the coronavirus, this was about the 22nd of January, where we started getting the first results back, the data back from the World Health Organization. I do what I normally do when I try to understand something, is I built a model, a simulation model, to try and see if I can understand. So I was just recording a simple model every day. What was the actual the total number of infections around the world? How many of those infections have unfortunately passed away? And on the 22nd of January, 580 people infected globally, 17 deaths reported. And then I recorded them day by day as the numbers was released. And very quickly I picked up a pattern, which is often the case when something is growing exponentially. It turns out that the daily growth rate in both the number of infections is about 12%, and the number of deaths a little bit less in terms of the number of infections, slightly below 12%, slightly higher in the number of deaths. And this allowed me to start predicting. And even though it's a very simple algorithm, the predictions turns out to be highly accurate. For example, yesterday, it was the 11th of March, and my model was predicting that on the 11th of March, we're going to have about 132,000 infections globally and about 4,787 deaths reported globally. The actual numbers were 129,000 and 4,751. It's remarkable accuracy. Nothing special about me or the algorithm. It's just that normally exponential growth functions are highly predictable. In fact, it's really interesting because when you now take the sort of general rule of 70, which allows you to predict the doubling time of something that's growing exponentially, if you divide 70 by about 12%, you get just over 6 days. So let's keep it simple and say it's 7 days. So every week you're going to be doubling, right? So we're currently on 130,000 cases. In a week's time, we'll be at 260. A week after that at 520. That's 500,000 cases. A week after that, over 1 million. And then after that, it gets really scary. 1, 2 million, 4 million, 8 million, 16, 32, 64, 128 million. And remembering 3 to 4% of those are unfortunately going to pass away if the current death rate continues. And what's really scary is what happens if we combine exponential growth with finite resources. The situation gets really, really bad. So as you probably know, the medical systems around the world, health systems are already overwhelmed in many countries, including developing countries. So what will happen if, which is often the case, the capacity to increase the amount of tests are much easier to grow than the capacity to treat? I mentioned about 20% of the cases become so symptomatic that they require serious health care. So imagine 80% don't, right? So if you suddenly have millions of test kits around that people can test themselves, of course the number of positives are going to increase. And when people test positive, I can just think for myself, my kids were involved, people I care about. I would want to get the best treatment. I'm going to pitch up at my doctor or at the hospital and say, treat me. And you can imagine that that's going to completely overwhelm the health system. So any imbalance between the capacity to test and the capacity to treat can cause real havoc if you already are capacity constrained. In fact, this exponential growth is a very interesting thing. One of my mentors, Professor Alan Barnard, he delivered a very famous lecture in 1969, which is the year that I was born. That's how we got connected originally. He was famous for a very interesting quote. He said that the biggest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. We think in linear ways, and here I want to reach out a little bit and ask you to not judge so quickly the public health officials and maybe politicians and even senior executives of companies that have waited too long to react. Is that the problem with the exponential function is that initially it looks linear, right? You see that sort of suddenly going like this. That first part is linear. It looks linear, even though it's actually exponentially growing, but doubling every week when the numbers are just tens or hundreds. That doesn't seem bad. It's like it's a few hundred. There's no infections in my country. Why should I panic now? We have so many other things to focus our limited attention and budget on. But of course it accelerates, and that's where it gets away from us. So when we procrastinate too long, when we procrastinate, early, we run out of time, and we don't have the time to actually take the type of steps that could have made a huge difference. And when you're facing a pandemic, generally speaking, listen to the World Health Organization's advice. Sanitize, wash your hands, sing happy birthday for 20 seconds. Don't touch your face. Don't be within a meter of somebody else. If you don't need to travel, don't travel. And if you do become symptomatic, don't just pitch up at the doctor or at the hospital. Phone them first. Share with them what you're experiencing. Let them diagnose you over the phone, and if it's serious enough, let them direct you to where's the best facility to be treated. So I think that's the key part of the advice that I'm sharing. And I think it also is more generally applicable to many other type of really tough decisions that we're facing, is we don't want to overreact. But when you think about it, if it's something that involves exponential growth and finite resources, what's the worst that can happen if we overreact early? Feel a little bit or look a little bit foolish. So what? What's the worst case scenario if we wait too long? Things can get out of control really, really, really quickly. So my general advice, if I can summarize it, is to say, procrastinating is generally bad. If you have to procrastinate later, not early. If you are assigned a task or have committed to do something, quickly have a look at it. See how complex it is. Do you have a full kit of everything that you need? And if you realized, wow, this is much more complicated than I thought, I don't have everything I need, don't waste time, start immediately. If it turns out to be simpler, you already have everything, then you can procrastinate like me and wait until the last moment, and that will really be useful to get you into flow, because you really want to focus your attention. When it comes to overreacting and panicking, panic early, right? That's my general advice, not later, because you might have run out of time. And as I mentioned, give some credit or at least some sympathy to these healthcare officials and even politicians and company executives. It's so easy to get this wrong, to say, the numbers are small initially. What's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen, it's actually pretty easy to do the calculations. Pick up what's the doubling time, right? What's the growth rate per day? Calculate what's the doubling time. What are the numbers going to do? What's the best case, worst case scenario, and how best to respond when that happens. So I hope that was useful. I have a YouTube channel that I share these type of insights with often. If you found this valuable, it'll be great if you can subscribe to that. I also have a podcast series called Impossible Unless, where I take each episode some target or goal or objective that we want to achieve that we think might be so ambitious that it might even be considered impossible. And what I share with you is the research that we've done over the last 2 decades or so with field testing around the world to give you those unless conditions. What are the conditions that, if we can put that in place, can make the impossible possible? Hope that you enjoyed this, and see you the next time.